I have a question I want to start this morning off with today. Our question is simply this. It's a question that you have given to me. We asked for questions over the last couple of weeks to say, we want to engage with culture, and because we want to engage with culture, there's going to be questions that come our way. What's a question that somebody has asked you that maybe you had a hard time answering and maybe wanted us to discuss it in a way on Sunday morning? So we came up with some of those questions, and the biggest, most oft asked question was this one right here. Is God real? Is God real? Does God exist? That was the question, or some form of that question. Is he just a mythical creature that man has made up, or is he truly real? And I ask, if I were to say yes, how do you prove it? And if I were to say no, how do you prove it? How do you prove that God is real, or how do you prove that God isn't real? And that's a question that has been debated for centuries. It's been debated for centuries by men and women that are much smarter than I am. And in those debates, you can watch them on YouTube, you can read them in books, you can read them on blogs. In those debates, when the debates are done, both sides seem to think that they've won. Both sides seem to think they've won. There is no silver bullet answer that says, yes, there is a God, and there's no silver bullet answer that says, no, there isn't a God. So how do we answer this question, and how do we take these steps? I mean, is it even possible to look into the Bible and say there is proof of an existence of God because it gives a full explanation? The answer is no. Because when you look at the Bible, and if you were here during our John hour at 9 o'clock going through the book of John, they went through John chapter 1, and they took a look back also at Genesis chapter 1. Because both those verses say this: in the beginning, God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. In the beginning, which means before the beginning, they were already there. The Bible doesn't try and prove God. It just assumes He was already there. It just points out the reality He was already there. So how do we answer this question? How do we look into this to really grab it? Because this question, the reality of God, might be, or quite possibly is, the most important question we will ever ask. I mean, that's a heavy-duty thing. And to not have an answer, or to not have a definitive answer, that's a little bit scary. Because when you stop and think about this is a question, like I said, was number one that you guys asked, but it's also the number one most feared question for Christians to have to be asked. And I thought to myself, why would you fear this question? I think the fact that there's a lack of a definitive answer, and there's so many different debates out there, it really kind of weighs on us that we don't want to answer this. And so I came up with just a couple of my own opinion of why people struggle to answer this question, or at least why I would. And the first one is this: I think it's because so much hangs in the balance of this answer. So much hangs in the balance of this answer. It determines worldviews. If there is a God, you're going to live one way. If there is not a God, you're going to live another. It's just the reality of it all. And when we begin to dive into it, I'm going to guess that most of us in here are believers. If you are not a believer in God, thanks for being here today. And I promise today is not one of those days where I'm going to bash all people who don't believe in God, because this is a question that I think we really all struggle with. But if you're a believer in God, if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you believe more than just that we are created. That He created the world, that in the beginning God created, that in the beginning was the Word. You believe even bigger than that, because what you believe, if you were a believer in Jesus Christ, is that God not only created, but He also sent His Son to put on flesh, to live a perfect life, to die a substitutionary death for you and for me so He could have a relationship. So not just is there this cosmic God that is out there that you believe in, but you also believe He wanted to have a relationship with you. That's amazing. And that should shape the way you see the world. It literally will change your worldview. You'll see the world through God's eyes. And as a matter of fact, C.S. Lewis, who used to be an atheist, a person who doesn't believe in a God, picked up the Bible and began reading the Bible, and God spoke to him through it and became a believer. You probably know him for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or maybe even Mere Christianity. But this is what he writes about Christianity and the effect it has in his life. He said this, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen. Not only because I see it, but because by it, I see everything else. Christianity has shaped his worldview. It has shaped all the things. He has a whole new view because he's a whole new person. When Christ comes into our life, we're a new creation. Our eyes are opened. And that's the way it begins to shape the way we see this world, how we act, how we live, how we speak, how we treat others. But then on the flip side, if you don't believe there's a God, if you don't believe there's a God, it too will shape your worldview. Because when you take God out of the picture, all we're really left with is an illusion. And I know that sounds a little crazy to say it, but this comes from a free thinker atheist website that I was reading, just kind of what their worldview actually is. What a person that doesn't believe in God, because for my whole life, I've believed in God, and at a point in time in my life in junior high, I believed in Jesus Christ and knew that he was my Savior, and it transformed my life. I've never had that opportunity, if you want to call it that, to see from a different worldview. So I had to kind of look into it, and I didn't understand it. But I just want to give you some small points and some of the things they pointed out. This idea that human illusion is everything that is governed by physics. That first, there's an illusion of the mind, that reality doesn't actually exist. And I know that sounds a little crazy, and maybe it doesn't to you. Maybe this is the camp where you're at. But let me tell you what they say. It says that we're all just energy. We're all just biology. We're all just matter. And in that energy and biology and matter, there is no you and there is no me. We are just bodies. There's no actual personal part to it all. And I know, like I said, it was hard for me to wrap my head around, and maybe it's the same for you, but that's kind of what it says. We're just bodied, governed by physics. The universe is just information. Just information. That's all it is. And as I began to look at that, there's no purpose to our existence other than to exist. The second thing was the illusion of the will. There is no free will. If you don't believe in a God, there's no free will, there's no choice, that physics actually determines everything that you do. They've actually gone into this quantum physics and all this studying that says that your body reacts before your brain tells you to react. And the reason why it says that is because we don't have free will. Physics determines everything that we do. The third thing is there was an illusion of value. Nothing has real value. Only things we ascribe value to do we find valuable. But other people don't have to find that valuable. There is no value in it. Physics is what kind of tells us what to do. There's no value in anybody else unless we give it to them. And justice is just what we want it to be. The unfortunate thing is we can see this in our government right now, in the way the votes are going down right now. There is no intrinsic value when you remove God from things. And so it shapes our worldview. And I began to look at this, and we have to understand when there's no answer to why there is anything or where anything came from, there's no reason to give it value because it's all just an accident. And this is a worldview. So you have to understand how important this question is. How important it is for us to understand who we are. As a matter of fact, I was picking up some stuff from a book called The God Delusion. And The God Delusion is written by a guy by the name of Richard Dawkins, extremely well-known atheist, extremely smart guy, way smarter. Half the stuff I had to kind of look up words that he was using to figure out what he was actually talking about. And he wrote this in The God Delusion. As a matter of fact, to open up The God Delusion, he said these words, I am writing this book to try to get people who believe in God to stop. That was his whole purpose of writing the book. But at the end, it's amazing as he wraps it up, he says these words, and it's almost as if he's poking fun at his own belief, but at the same time, making it very true, this is what he believes. This is what he said. Think about it. On one planet, and possibly only one planet in the entire universe, molecules that normally would make nothing more than molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock gather themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they're capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, hearing, capturing, and eating other such animated chunks of complexity. Capable in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet another chunk of complex matter. That's his wrap-up to it all. Now stop and think about that. It's almost like he's kind of making fun of the idea that they only believe they were complex matter. At the same time, he's saying we're just complex matter. And when you really let it kind of sink in, he's saying you're just energy. You're just matter. You're just biology. You have no worth, no value, and no purpose. You want to know why it's difficult for us to answer this question, is there a God? Is God real? Because our answer determines how people will see this world. Will we see it with value or will we not? Will we see it with a God who has purpose or will we not? That's a huge question to answer. And it kind of puts it on our shoulders. This second thing as well is that as we answer that, and we're afraid to answer it because we don't want to construe or want to change somebody's mind, or whatever it might be, I think that the second reason is that we're just plain afraid of the loaded question. I mean, what if you answer wrong? You're made to look like a fool, aren't you? If you answer what people think is wrong, people think it's a myth. And that goes both ways. If you answer wrong from the standpoint of why you're an atheist or why you're a theist. Why you're a theist, which is no God, or theist, God. If you answer wrong, you're going to be looking like a fool. The thing is though, if you answer right, you win the argument. But the problem is, are you winning? Are you really winning? See, we can answer from the Christian standpoint with arguments. As a matter of fact, there are these people called apologists. And apologists are people not who apologize. They're ones who defend. And their job is to defend the faith. And in their knowledge, I mean, men and women that are mind-blowingly smarter than I am, in their knowledge, they take different arguments to say, science hasn't proven this yet. And you know what? The Bible actually tells us to do these things. And I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says this, "But in your hearts regard Christ the Lord as holy, ready at any time to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you." Be ready to defend that. And these people, they've come up with some great arguments. And they're actually called arguments. And I'm going to just talk about a couple of them here. And like I said, I'm not going to go real deep because really the point of my message today, I want to let you know is more about application than about knowledge. And so we're going to give you a little bit of the knowledge, but I want to really focus on the application towards the end. The first one is this. It's called the cosmological argument, or basically, our current something had to come from something. Our current something had to come from something. Science itself has proven that something has to come from something else. So even from the very beginning, even from the very basis of what they want to do, matter had to come from somewhere. It had to be created. Therefore, if it had to be created, it needed to have a creator. The cosmological argument. The second one that these apologists really grab onto is the theological argument or the God argument. Do you realize how many cultures there are over the span of centuries that have believed in at least a deity, that had some sort of moral laws? Ones that have not been connected, ones that are not, there because the Christians went out and witnessed and did these kind of things. These are just ones that have been built up from the very beginning. So they had a belief in God before there was even a God told to them. Why is that? Science can't tell you. The third thing, the teleological argument or the evidence of design. There's complexity in this world. And there's order in this world. And when we stop and we look at the complexity of the human mind, they have tried to do a number of studies on the human mind, the ability to remember, and the ability to do things, and all the stuff that it does. That if I asked you to take a memory from 40 years ago, for those of you who are over 40, if I asked you to take that, it would immediately within milliseconds come back to you. Why does the mind work like that? Science can't answer that. Why does the eye work the way that it works? Why does the heart of a giraffe pump up to the head of the giraffe to get blood to the brain up that long neck? Why does tree sap work the way it does within a tree? Science can't answer those questions. There's such amazing order. There's different arguments that are out there that talk about the watchmaker. That when I look at the watch on my hand, I know that this didn't just come together by accident. That somebody had a design and somebody had a purpose for it. I go more simple with a sub sandwich. Okay, let's just be real honest. If I took ham and I took turkey and I took cheese and I took bread and I took mayo, and you guys are all getting hungry now, and I took a little bit of spicy deli mustard and I put it all in a bag and I threw it up in the air and it would all land perfectly and wrap itself in the sandwich, nobody's going to believe that. But that's kind of what we think about if we don't think there's some designer with some purpose, with some creation ability that created us in this way, the teleological argument. The next one is the anthropological argument, and that's the uniqueness of humans. We differ from all other creatures. We possess intellect, moral judgment, self-awareness, and really a knowledge of God. It's funny, one of the arguments that I read actually talked about people don't hate things that don't exist. And even if you want to say, I don't believe in God, you can't say I don't believe in God. It's like me saying, I really hate unicorns. You know, it just doesn't even make any sense to say that unless I believe there's a unicorn to hate. And so there's this knowledge of God that is out there, and we can say, you know, how do we explain the differences between humans and everything else? How do we know that stealing and killing is wrong when every other animal steals and kills? How do these things come together? How can we suggest that we've evolved beyond other things when dolphins have things called echolocation, which I would love to have? That'd be awesome. And why'd they get it and why didn't I? And we begin to kind of look at those kind of things and say, these are some arguments that are out there, and there's lots more. As a matter of fact, here shortly we're going to look at a fifth one, but there's one resource I found that had 36 different arguments on why science can't explain this. But the problem is none of them really nail that silver bullet. There's still questions out there, and sometimes science is able to explain some of those things. And as science grows, some of those explanations are going to get taken care of. And there's two things I really want to see, and reasons why I didn't go deeper here. But first is this. Most who don't believe in God have heard all of these arguments, and they laugh at them. As a matter of fact, I went to a Free Thinkers website, and on the Free Thinkers website, there was actually a bingo board. On the bingo board, it had the list of arguments I just gave, plus more, that if you're going to go to a debate, if you're going to watch a sermon online, by the way, if you're watching online, thank you for joining us on that. And if you're going to listen to one, you can actually score your bingo board and see how well you do. I hope today, if you're a non-believer in God, I'm looking at the camera as I speak, if you're a non-believer in God, that you scored well today. Because these are the arguments that are out there, and they just laugh at them, though. And the second thing is this. I already asked the question. They're called arguments. How often do you listen in the midst of an argument? How often do you stop and say, you know what? You are right. Not only are you right, I'm going to lay down my position in the thing that I was so entrenched in and just acknowledge you being right, and I'm going to come to your side. Does that happen very often? No. No, it doesn't. That's right, because he has a sister. He knows. And the reality that we really have to get into is that this isn't going to change people. And even a bigger reality is that we're not even fighting with people. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 tells us very clearly these words. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, and against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens. We're not winning when we're fighting against people. We're only destroying them and hurting them. So that is a reason why we, I think, struggle to answer this. Because even if we're right, we're not winning. And we have a natural care for people. We don't just want to destroy somebody. Or maybe you do, I don't know. But But I think we have to approach it with that sort of way. So we look at this idea of the worldview and how it changes everything, and that makes it difficult for it to answer. Then these loaded what-ifs are in there. But the third reason that I think we really struggle, at least this is why I struggle, to answer this question, is God real? It's because I'm not always 100% sure that he is. And I know that's probably not something you should hear from a pastor at a church, but there are days that I struggle with the reality of God. There are days that I struggle with the reality of who he says he is, of who I think he is. And as I struggle with that, I see things happen in the world and I say, why God? I see things happen in my life and I say, why God? If you really existed, would this happen? And I began to realize, and I even have to continue to remind myself of this very thing, is that when I ask those questions, I have to answer with another question, and that is, do I have the right perception of God? Do I have the right perception of God? Because a lot of times when I look at God in such a way to say he should fit this bill for me, am I putting him in my box, or am I understanding who he actually is? That he doesn't fit in my box. He doesn't fit in any box. You know, I began to think about this idea of wrong perception. And in it, I think our perceptions, and we already know this, our perceptions can shape our realities, or at least our perceived realities. And there's a reality here in this. 90% of our error in our thinking comes from error in our perception. But how do we get the perception we have? Our perception's always under attack. Our perception's always being spoken to. There's things going on in this world, on the news, in the media, in the movies, you name it. It's hitting our perception and trying to continue to change it. As a matter of fact, yesterday, got to go to Lego Movie 2. And you know me, I love movies. And while we were at Lego Movie 2, I was sitting there and I was watching it, and you couldn't help but see the social conditioning that was taking place that's aimed at 5 to 12-year-olds. You could see the things, and it wasn't all bad. As a matter of fact, the church could use some of the things that it was talking about, but some things are very obvious that maybe they're trying to speak a message and socially condition or change the perception of these children who will be voting in 6 to 8 years. And maybe, just maybe, they're trying to do these things. As a matter of fact, there was a song, and if you ever saw the first one, you know the song that stuck in your head was Everything is Awesome. Well, this one is this is a catchy song that's going to get stuck inside your head. And they kept repeating that word over and over and over again. And it was a really fun beat, and it was great. And you know what? We're going to play it for you when you leave, so it gets stuck inside your head as you head on out the door. But here is what I've started to think about. How many times do you have to hear it for it to get stuck inside your head? How many times will it get repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated that this is the perception you should believe about life, or even more so, about God? How has our perception been warped by somebody else telling us something and changing something? Let me give you a little bit better example about perception and how it warps our thinking. Today I have a new shirt on. This new shirt came from Goodwill on Monday. Okay? Now, let me tell you something about Goodwill on Monday. Goodwill on Monday does 25% off. So we go to Goodwill on Monday and we check things out. We like to take a look around Goodwill on Monday. While we were at Goodwill on Monday, the story kind of goes like this. We were down by Costco, and I told my kids, I said, hey, you guys want to go to Goodwill? And they had an emphatic, yes! Because my kids are okay with Goodwill. Can I tell you, when I was their age, I would have said, no! Because Goodwill is gross. The reason why Goodwill was gross for me when I was growing up is because that was my punishment. Goodwill and Kmart, if I got bad grades, that's where we went shopping. If I got good grades, I got to get Nikes and Reeboks. If I didn't, I had to get whatever thing was at Kmart or at Goodwill. That was the way it was. So it was punishment for me. I didn't want to go to Goodwill. I only wanted to drop things off I didn't want anymore at Goodwill. That was my perception because my parents had told me over and over and over again, if you don't get good grades, you're going to Goodwill. No! You know, that was the mentality that I took into Goodwill. But there's been a change in my life. I've seen it in a whole new way. And as we walked into this Goodwill, we went down to the one that's down here by Savers across from Jason's Deli and Chipotle down there. Peyton actually stopped me. He goes, Dad, this is a fancy Goodwill. And I went, No such thing. Okay? Because still in my mind, there's still this sticking in the back of my brain that there's no such thing as a fancy Goodwill. Although it is set up differently, they have nicer racks, kind of has a boutique look versus just a random store look with this stuff shoved on racks and whatever it might be. It was set up really nice. And I found this shirt. It still had the tags on it, so from the store. So I'm like, I know nobody else has worn it. It's all good. The funny thing is that we always get mad about secondhand clothes, but tomorrow this shirt will be worn, so it's not going to change anything, right? But when you stopped and looked at it, I was looking around, and I'm like, oh, good, I found that. Sure, found another one. My kids found a Monopoly board that hadn't been opened before. So got all that, and I went up to the desk to pay. And while I was up there at the desk to pay, it rang up, and I said, oh, don't forget, it's Monday, 25% off. And the guy looked at me and said, sorry, sir, this is a higher-end Goodwill, and we don't give the 25% off discount here. And I looked at Peyton, I'm like, you were right, it is a fancy Goodwill. I'm sorry that I doubted you on the fanciness of this Goodwill, because to me, fancy and Goodwill is like smart kindergartner. You know, it doesn't matter that much. I mean, you're still got a long ways to go. You know what I'm saying? So I began to look at that, and I started to think, my perception was so warped by what I was told and the thinkings that I had. And as I began to look at this skewed reality that Goodwill is just another store, I also thought to myself, what things have I been told about God that were wrong, that skewed all of my perception? That even when somebody says, no, this is it, you got to go, ha. No way. Can't be a Goodwill. It can't be a fancy Goodwill. It can't be that kind of God. So what I want to do is I want to look and see that maybe, just maybe, somewhere along the lines, you've been told the wrong thing about God. And maybe, just maybe, when you have doubts like I do about who God is, maybe it's because the God that you believe in actually didn't exist. It wasn't the God of the Bible. It was a God that we were told. Sometimes we have a tendency in our lives to live from the God that was told me so Bible, or the God that was told me so by somebody else, that somebody else told me, that I haven't done any actual research on my own, that I have never actually gone through the process of being discipled, about being one-on-one, about being connected with people. What if my thoughts on God never actually were true? And I began to look at some different gods that I think I believed in, that God didn't come through for me. And when that God didn't come through me, then I didn't believe in him and I walked away from him. But it wasn't the right God. And the first one was this: it's the bodyguard God. And this bodyguard God we're going to talk more about next week. But the bodyguard God says that if you believe in me, nothing bad is going to happen to you. It's that one that says good things happen to good people, but bad things don't. Can I tell you that's not true? Can I tell you that's not true? And my guess is you already know that, but I'm just going to affirm it in you, that Christianity itself is based on a bad thing happening to a very good person. As a matter of fact, a perfect person. The bad thing being the crucifixion, the perfect person being Jesus. Did you know that his 12 followers, one committed suicide, but the other 11, of those 11, 10 of them were martyred, killed for their faith. One of them was exiled to an island, none of which sound pleasing. None of which make it sound like as long as I follow this guy, good things are going to happen. As a matter of fact, Jesus tells us in John 15, verse 18 and 19, he says, if the world hates you, understand that it hated me before it hated you. If you were one of the world would love you as its own. However, because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of it, the world hates you. How many people have rejected the idea of God because he didn't fall into their, I'm a good person though, bad things shouldn't happen, suffering shouldn't happen? How many people do you know? And part of the reason why I give you these God things is because I truly believe that there's a good handful of people that don't believe in God because their wrong perception of God was never corrected. So you have the bodyguard God. The second one is the on-demand God. This is the God that answers fair prayer requests. The prayer requests that I would answer if I were God. So I'm going to ask you, God, these very questions, and I assume that you will answer them as I would answer them. Because it is all about me, right? And you are in my box, right? You are on demand, and when you don't answer me the way that I wanted you to do it, and you don't answer me the way that I prayed it, then I get mad at you. Can I just ask you, if you've been a Christian for a long time, or even if you've prayed for a long time and had prayers not answered, are there some prayers that you prayed, especially as a teenager, that you're glad that God didn't answer? You look back now and you're like, whew, you do have a plan, and I don't have a clue. That's the reality where we really live at. But we have a tendency to blame God for not being the way we want him to be. Then, the third God is this. It's the feely God. The feely God. I can always feel his presence. He's like a boyfriend or a girlfriend that when he's in the room, I can just feel it, and I get the tingles and all the things inside, and it's bliss. We have that idea about God sometimes, but when we don't feel him, we're like, oh, he's not there. And when he's not there, we're like, that period starts to grow, and well, if he's not there, then he doesn't care. And if he doesn't care, therefore he doesn't exist. We have this long string of the way we put it all together. But here is a true and proven fact, and that is this. The least aware of the things that you are, or you are least aware of the things that you are that are most constant. If the temperature is perfect, you ever just turn to somebody and go, man, the temperature's perfect today. We don't ever do that. Yeah, when it's too cold, yeah, we'll make a comment. If it's too hot, we'll make a comment. But if it's just where we need to be or we get used to it, it's like health, like breathing through your nose. All of the things that we take for granted until it's taken away, we forget how good it is that it's there. And I think we do the same thing with God. Then this one here is one that I struggle with probably the most. Well, maybe 4 and 5. But it's the anti-science God. That you can't believe in God and science. I was told that as a kid, that somehow science and God were at conflict with one another. But what I've come to find out is that God created science, and he created math, and he created order, and it truly is amazing the way that it all works together. And we have to hold on to that. But oftentimes we can get caught up where we're thinking something different than that. And the last one is the guilt God. The one who controls you through guilt and fear. He might love you, but he sure doesn't like you very much. Anybody in here had to experience that before? The problem with that is even when you leave that God, he tends to stick around. He's always kind of hanging over your shoulder, telling you what you did wrong, how you did it wrong. And we have this thinking that this is a God of the Bible, or maybe a hybrid of these. And I know there's a whole lot more, but we don't have time. But let's be honest. When we get the wrong picture of God and all seems to crumble around us, man, we get ourselves caught up in thinking, well, there just can't be one. Because there's no way that God that they talk about at the church fits into this, so there just can't be one at all. And I began to think about this and began to really dive deeper into it in my mind. Sometimes because of uneducated interpretation. Sometimes it's because of unmet expectations. Sometimes it's just because of ignorance and lack of discipleship. But we believe in these gods until they don't come together, and then we just abandon them and abandon all gods with it. Can I tell you those gods don't exist? But there is one that does. And the one that does is the God of the Bible. The one that does is the one who sent his son for you and for me, so we can have a relationship with me as a God of love, a God of mercy, a God of justice, and a God of grace. And we can't get confused with the way we want him to be versus who he actually is. And I began to think about that and thinking, if we can change our thinking, would that change anything? Does that answer the question, is God real? And I don't think it does. That question still lingers out there. Is God real? Is God existing and in our presence? And I think if we want to answer this question, A, for ourselves, and B, for somebody else, we have to understand there is no quick answer. We can't just snap our fingers and say, here's how it's going to work, here's God, blam, take it or leave it. Although sometimes we do that to people. We can't just say, hey, you know what? You need to just believe. That's not going to work for people. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It's going to take connection. It's going to take them or even you diving a little deeper. You know what I found, though? If somebody is asking you the question, which, like I said, we got a number of questions on those cards that said, is God real? If somebody's asking you that question, there's something they see in your life that they think might actually help them answer it. See, I told you I had 4 reasons on the arguments for God, and I was going to give you a 5th one later. The 5th one is now, and the 5th one is you. You are the argument that God exists. The way he has worked in your life, the way he has worked in your heart, the way he has worked in my life, the way he has worked in my heart. I couldn't change to be the way that I am today without a supernatural being changing me. It's just not possible. I'm way too selfish in my own natural being to be thinking about anything else besides myself. Real, authentic Christianity. You, me. There's a guy by the name of Brennan Manning. He wrote a book called The Ragamuffin Gospel. But he had a quote that is used at the beginning of a DC Talk song, if you guys know who DC Talk is, called What If I Stumble? And it says this: the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. And I thought about that, and I think, you know what, maybe it's not the single greatest cause of atheism, but I'm sure it's a cause of why people walk away. But also, can it be flipped around? That if people deny God because of Christians, can they also see God because of Christians? And I began to think real, authentic Christianity, real, authentic, God, I want your will to be done and not mine. When we fully experience him and live in his will, can that flow from outside of us and affect those that are around us? Can that change other people's lives? See, I believe anyone who loves Jesus, loves the church, and loves the lost, they want to make a difference in this world. They want to be able to answer this question for somebody to say, yes, God is real and he is alive inside of me. God's not dead. He's surely alive. And he's living on the inside, roaring like a lion. You ever sang that song before? He is. He's on the inside and he's just ready to come out and he's just ready to be used or to use us for his glory and his honor. Can I tell you the reason why I didn't just give you information and just give you statistics and just give you basic strategies is sometimes I think we get too much of that as a church and we just sit and we eat all that up and then we become what my buddy Bob back here who taught our 9 o'clock hour, we become spiritually obese warriors. We can't move. We can't even put our armor on because we're just too fat. And we're just taking it all in, taking it all in, taking it all in, instead of going out there and actually putting it into application. So today what I want to do is I want to talk about the application and I want to talk about the going. I don't normally do this where I give us the passage of Scripture at the end of the message, so I apologize for you guys who are like, why did I even bring my Bible today? I'm glad you did. Open to Matthew chapter 9. Because in Matthew chapter 9, we're going to take a look at this application of having God be seen in my life. Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 35, I believe that Jesus here wants to use us and have a huge impact on the world around us. And this is what he says, starting in verse 35. He says, Jesus continued going around to all the towns and the villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dejected. Now, if you're reading from the NIV or the ESV, it says they were harassed and helpless. If you have the New Living Translation, it says they were confused and helpless. And if you're reading the Message version, it says confused and aimless. That's what's describing the people that are all around. That's what, when I read the Freethinkers website, is what I picture, is just confused and lost and harassed and helpless and the wrong picture of who God is. That somehow, some way, their perception got skewed. But the great thing is all of those passages, all the different translations say the same thing. They were like sheep without a shepherd. You know in John 10 that Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd? That he is willing to lay down his life for his sheep? He's willing to go out of his way to lay down his life for his sheep. And then he turns to his disciples in verse 37. He says, the harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. As we take a look at that passage, there's 4 things that I see here that are clear indicators of how we can be Jesus to somebody else. How we can be used by God to show his reality. And the first thing is this: see as Jesus saw. See as Jesus saw. That whole worldview thing that we talked about. When Jesus looked at the crowd, he didn't just look at a bunch of people who were about to demand his time and energy, because they were. But instead, he saw them as lost, and helpless, and hurting. And you know what? They were just being basically oppressed or depressed and downcast, and all the things in their lives were keeping them in this clueless state. And he says, just see them for who they are. And the thing is he says, there's a spiritual hunger. They're looking, they're searching, they're asking the question, is God real? There are people in your neighborhood. There are people at your workplace. There are people at your school. There are people all around, everywhere we go, that are struggling with this very question. How are we answering it? Are we even seeing them? He saw them. We need to see as Jesus saw. Second thing is we need to feel as Jesus felt. Once you begin to see as Jesus sees, you're going to feel as he feels. So he had compassion on them. Can I ask you a question? When was the last time we felt compassion for the lost? When was the last time we felt compassion for the hurting? When was the last time we felt compassion for the person that asked, is God real? And our response is, I'm going to crush him with the theological argument that Matt gave me on Sunday morning. We shouldn't have that. We should have, this person is lost and hurting and wanting to know who God is, and I have him inside of me. I want to show him. I want to feel as he felt. When he saw the crowds, it broke his heart. What breaks our heart? Have you even asked God what breaks his? And how we come alongside him in that? Third thing is this, is pray as Jesus prayed. All the things that he saw would be discouraging to me. All the things that he was in the middle of, from the political realm of the Roman system to the people that were all around, to the thinking and all of that, would have been very discouraging. But was Jesus discouraged? I'm going to be very honest with you here, and I'm just going to lay this out. The things that New Mexico has done in the last week and a half has made me not proud to live in New Mexico. And I don't say that in a political agenda. I truly believe in life. And I truly believe in the things that God has called us to. And when people want to play with lives, I don't like that. And to know that we rank as the worst in all of the abortion laws in the entire United States, that tears me up inside. And you may not agree with me, and I'm okay with that. That's fine. I'm just telling you where I'm at. But my first inclination was, I got to find a new job in another state. I got to get out of here. And I thought, no way. No way. God has put me here for a reason, to be a light and to pray for the people of this state and to pray for the people who are running this state, because it already tells us to do that, to pray for our government, not to bash our government, but to pray for them. That's what I'm here for. That's what God has placed me here for. And we need to do these things. And as I began to look at this, I said, he prayed. He prayed, for people to be in the harvest. Have we prayed for people to be in the harvest, to see as Jesus saw, to feel as Jesus felt, and go and do it? Because really, that's the next thing. The fourth thing is do as Jesus did. Do as Jesus did. He didn't just pray, but he also rolled up his sleeves and he got busy. He got right in the middle of it all. He was out there with the people. Are we willing to get involved like this? See, ministry to other people, it's messy. Because people are messy. And that's why we like to keep our distance. But that's what we've been saying for the last 6 weeks. We have to engage. We have to engage in the mess. We have to be in the middle of it all. We have to be reaching out to, and we have 1,000 excuses. But God doesn't want your excuses. All he wants is a willing heart. You don't have to have a bunch of letters after your name with PhD or MD. You don't have to have all that stuff on there. You don't have to have a seminary degree. You don't have to even know what seminary is. You just have to have a willing heart that God can use you for his glory and his honor. The question is, are we? Are we willing to do that? Do we have a willing heart that's ready to engage a confused and helpless world with the love of God, whether they believe in him or not? Whether their worldview lines up with ours or not? Are we there? I pray that today, as we talk about is God real, A, you know that he is, and B, you are his vessel to show others that he's true. He's real as well. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for who you are, and thank you for what you do and the way you even speak into our lives. God, you've been more than good to us. Even when we doubt, you don't turn your back on us. Even when we question you and your methods and your direction, you don't turn your back on us. You were there, you are real, and you are fully alive. And you've been there since before the beginning, as hard as that is to comprehend. That you've always been, that you are the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. You are everything that we could possibly imagine. And more. God, help me not to put you in a box. Help me not to say no for you. But instead, God, be a vessel willing to be used for your glory and your honor to reach a world that is lost, that it's struggling, that is wandering. God, if somebody asked this question this week to us, which I pray that you have somebody do it, it's not about winning an argument, but about seeing a soul that you love so much that you would send your son for and sharing that reality with that person. God, we're so grateful for what you do. We ask you to continue to do it. We pray it in your name. Amen. I am going to step over here to these empty seats up in the front, and I would love to pray with you. First of all, if you're in that camp of not believing in God, I want to talk to you. Not because I want to try and change your mind, but I want to hear your story. I want to hear what brought you to that point. I want to hear where you're at. And it may take more than just a meeting after church to be able to do it, but I want to talk to you. And you know what? If you're asked that same question, my guess is there's a deeper story behind it. Listen before you speak. I'm pretty sure the Bible actually tells us to do that as well. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. Listen to where they're at and why they're there. And see how God can use you to shape it. I want to be over there the same for you. Maybe you have some other questions. I'll be down here as we pray, or as we sing this last song. Go ahead, Drew.
As Matt was sharing, I had just all these thoughts running through my head, especially as it pertains to a message involving this question, is God real? Because I thought back to when I was younger in the faith, and I was just ready to absorb stuff like this, because as Matt was saying, like I'm ready to just go debate. Like I'm ready to get out there and just throw my haymaker of an argument. And it made me think of the time when I was doing some martial arts training, some mixed martial arts training, and it totally changed my whole perception of stuff, because growing up as a kid, I loved karate. Karate Kid, that was me. I loved it, and then I got into mixed martial arts and just realized it was a sham, it was all a lie. And the reason I say that is just because one of my little buddies, or one of my friends, he was a little bit younger than me, got into karate, and his mom was like, he is so ready to fight with you. And so I'm like, okay, great. So we kind of had a little time at his house, and he's like, oh, I'm ready to show you some stuff. And I'm like, great. So I tackle him, put a chokehold on him, and he's done. And he's like, you can't do that. That's not how we fight. And I was like, says who? You know? And all I could think of was, just that whole, sometimes when we prepare our argument, we go in there with one expectation of this is how the fight is going to go down. Like a Napoleon Dynamite, right? Grab my wrist. No, my other wrist. No, your other wrist. With your other hand. Like, that's not how it works out in the real world. When we come with these arguments, when we feel we're loaded and ready, like we're going to win this, it doesn't happen like that.